Blessings everyone, NICO Scarlet Moon here. You are about to watch a clip of a live chat that I did recently on Patreon where we talked about death and transition from a multi-dimensional perspective. This has been edited to make sure that we can, of course, get rid of the chit-chat and just make sure that everything is all tightened up for YouTube, and this is going to be a multi-part installment, so stay tuned for parts 2, etc. So stay tuned, there will be more uploaded soon, but I hope you enjoy this. In this video, we start off going real deep, talking all about the transition, transmigration, reincarnation process, the multidimensional self, and we even get into talking a bit about earthbound spirits or earthbound beingness. So we're all pretty, so we're all pretty involved in our practice. That's good. That's good, because I want to make sure that, I'm not presenting anything that seems too basic or too beginner, but I also want to make sure that I'm reading the room as well. And I don't think we're going to have to worry too much about that with this. So that's good. All right. So let's get going on what is, let's talk about the soul's transition from the lower incarnation here. One of the best ways to describe the process of dying, I think, was actually done in the 1980s film Poltergeist, where Tangina the medium says, there is no death. It's merely a transition to another sphere of consciousness. And that is essentially, the best and most concise way to put it. When it comes to the act of dying, or passing away or transitioning from lower incarnation, it's actually the process of beginning to reunite with the multidimensional self in order to bring in and call back, and of course then reintegrate with all of this information from this experience, all of the new vibrations, all of the new codes, all of the new energy forms that that particular soul or that particular being had actually accumulated through this life process. This is something where it can get a little bit confusing, because sometimes we think, okay, well, how much of us goes with us, when we die, or how much of, that person or whoever is still them after they pass away. And this is why I choose to use terms like a transition from the lower incarnation, because when you are dealing with the process of dying, the higher self and the multidimensional self actually take over. It's almost like it's an oversoul retrieval is the best way I could describe it. You are pulling in an extension of the higher self, an extension of the multidimensional self, to be reintegrated, and of course then perhaps reassigned or assigned a new life stream, or maybe assigned or given a new task, a new experience to have. Sometimes people don't reincarnate at all. Sometimes they actually express as another aspect of the multidimensional self, and they actually work in another form of service. Sometimes they will, maybe if they have an angelic aspect to themselves, will start working in an angelic capacity, or if they are possibly, their multidimensional self carries a great deal of, say, starseed vibration or energy, in that there may actually be a go in that direction as well. Sometimes we see that a being will actually stay merged with the multidimensional self, or stay merged with the higher self, and will remain active except in service to their oversoul and their greater multidimensional expanse. When we talk about things like heaven realms, or we talk about paradise realms and things like that, when beings actually step in to those experiences, they are actually a part of a transition into service again in that particular multidimensional capacity. So there is, of course, an opportunity to go in that direction. Those are available, whether they are, going in accordance with a specific religion or not. That really depends also on that that soul's level of consciousness and level of evolution and all of that. Because sometimes what can happen is that if it looks like a soul or a being is just not prepared to experience what is all here, again, from a multidimensional perspective, yes, they will, learn to experience, say, the multidimensional self through maybe a more comfortable language, something that is actually set up to integrate them through something that's more comfortable to them. When we have this idea of maybe, a crossing over, the act of crossing over is essentially where we are leaving all lower dense attachments to the most recent life behind, to be dissolved, to be transmuted, to be cleared. And so when a person passes away, or when a being passes away, it's not necessarily like a fixed rule when it comes to the time spent or the amount of time passed between one step and the next. Again, we're going very quantum. It's very non-linear. So it all depends on where that being was in their level of consciousness. But when a being passes, they are actually, yes, without a body, and yet at the same time, still at the level of consciousness that they were in their life. And there is an opportunity for them for a brief period. Sometimes it's a week, sometimes it's 2 weeks, sometimes it's a month, to, I guess you could say, wrap up affairs, say goodbyes, make any kind of last moves or last shifts from an energetic and multidimensional space in their old life stream before crossing over. Before anything else can happen after that, that being does need to cross over. Getting called back by their higher self, maybe it's their guides, angels, whatever. There is a sense of understanding and imperative that, yes, I have to leave these aspects of self behind that do not serve. Now, they could be aspects of self that are attached to things that are ultimately, either detrimental or not applicable to the soul journey, not applicable to the evolution or ascension process. Sometimes they are things that we might consider to be negative or unhealthy, attachments to addictions, or, jealousy, rage, betrayal, vengeance, obsession, all of those kinds of things. They go through this process of deep soul clearing and soul purging. After reintegration with the multidimensional self, then that being, that soul, that that fractal of the Oversoul is going to, of course, either move on to maybe take on a new form of the multidimensional self, like I said, possibly even operating from a place of, angelic beingness, or stars, a different kind of starseed beingness, or even further out, may stay integrated with the multidimensional self, or quite possibly, yes, transmigrate or reincarnate into another expression, if that is a part of their journey and a part of the assessment of the Oversoul and the multidimensional self. That is how it is possible to still communicate with a being or a soul or a spirit that has crossed over and maybe reincarnated, or maybe they're operating in another way, because they still, that Oversoul, that multidimensional self and the Oversoul still holds all aspects and truths of that consciousness. So I'll give you an example. If I die tomorrow, is it possible to see the multidimensional spirit of someone still living? My fiance saw her living adult cousin as a young boy a couple of years ago. No sickness or illness going on in her cousin's life at the time. Yes, it is. It is absolutely possible too. And that is actually a very interesting situation that I've got kind of going on in my own life. I actually reconnected or found a way to reconnect with an old childhood friend. And their higher self had been actually talking to me since about January. But we'll have to talk about that in another video because I don't want to get too off topic. But let's just say I'm talking to their higher self that is essentially sort of the maturation of the friend I used to have. And when I say used to have, I'm talking like ages 6 and 7. And their present form, you know, who they are now, who they have changed to be, is actually quite spiritually awake. And I mean, 1,000 times smarter and more intelligent than I am. But they're actually quantifying all of this in a very left brain, very, very, you know, physical kind of world. And so they're kind of mental, you know, they kind of seem like that sort of like mad scientist. And I'm like reading their posts and I'm like, you are not spiritual in this sense. You're not spiritually active in your language. You are trying to quantify, oh my God, these are some amazing ass codes. You have no idea how on you are. So it's just an interesting thing to see that split go on. And yes, it is possible to see the multidimensional spirit of somebody still living, especially if that younger cousin aspect that is showing up there is a part of a timeline that is actually either getting restored or repaired. Okay, because again, we are talking about a quantum multidimensional thing here. Certain timelines go through collapses, some of them get restored, sometimes we all get back on a primary timeline. And if there is a fractal of self maintaining that old timeline in order to hold it to be restored, then it's going to happen. Okay, so I hope that makes sense. Let me know that makes sense. Because yeah, that's pretty poignant to what's going on right now. So, okay. Let's actually take a step over here. And I want to talk about, you know, what that 5th, 6th dimensional realm situation is, you know, for everybody. Because it's, I mean, a lot of people talk about going to 5D, going to 6D, 70 technically right now, you know, as of the last, you know, over the course of the last 12 months, you know, people have been kind of really working hard on the, you know, on the grids. The platform doesn't just stop at 5D, 6D for, you know, our experience. The actually, you know, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and 11, and 12 have already been kind of anchored into the Earth experience for people to kind of, you know, go on up into. It's kind of like adding an expansion to a video game. So it's like, you know, the level cap has been raised for everybody. But we talk about the 5th, 6th dimensional realm. We talk about New Earth. Some people call it Neo Gaia. Some people call it Nova Gaia. It doesn't matter. It's just a word. But it's the fifth dimensional Earth realm, 6th dimensional Earth realm. That is what is actually anchoring and overriding and overwriting the lower realm experience, the 3D, 4D experience that, you know, has kind of been, that is now kind of, well, it's technically gone. It's just being, you know, constantly recreated by the population, but it's now coming down. It's kind of dismantling the 5th, 6th dimensional realm, because it is a realm. It's not just a state of consciousness. It's not a metaphor for an attitude. is where a lot of people are going to have an opportunity to even reconnect and commune with those who've passed away and crossed over. In actuality, if you want to talk about sort of how these revelations happen, a lot of those who have passed away, especially within, I'm going to say, the last 8 to 9 years, a lot of those beings have not reincarnated. A lot of those beings are just on the other side of this veil. And, as the planet raises in its frequency, it's almost kind of, I don't want to make it biblical, because, that's always a place to go. And of course, if something could shift your attitude into a tense lower place, it's not always a high vibrational thing. But that's kind of the, when you talk about the dead will rise, that kind of thing. It's not really the dead are rising, but it's like those who have transitioned their souls that are also working on dismantling the lower realm that, that this is, are also coming from the other side. And that's where that's 5D, 6D. I've referred to that in my discussions with my clients, and with, people I've done the Pathwatcher soul strategy sessions with, who are, getting, tips and training on their spiritual journey, on things that they're working on, raising their dimensional frequency, raising their consciousness. We've been talking a lot about, well, what is that realm? That realm where those spirits, those folks who are already a part of that greater multidimensional expanse, who were once incarnated, what is that? And that is the 5th, 6th dimensional platform. I refer to that as the baby realm. I don't call it a baby realm to be mean, but it's sort of when all of these veils come crashing down, and you have a lot of people on this planet who are kind of starting their journey at the base level. It's going to be a lot easier for them to do it when they have grandma, right? Or whoever helping to coach them through that, helping them integrate through it, right? So it's like they're not going to wake up and just completely, and then their spiritual templates are just going to kind of pop. Right now, it's an opportunity to it's all they'll be there to actually kind of help out. So they're kind of helping out with this shift in consciousness anyway. NICO, that and the NICO you remember, is still intact, albeit emotionally and spiritually cleared, upgraded, and updated in the multidimensional self, in the Oversoul. So even though a different aspect of self is incarnated, all the other aspects of self are still held within the multidimensional self, which is also why we can, of course, have access to things like past lives. We can actually communicate even with our own past life selves. It's all held together by the multidimensional self. When we get into the topic of earthbound beingness, we talk about earthbound spirits and things like that. In many cases, the choice is honored, right? The choice is honored. It's a free will choice to cross over or not to cross over, to go or not to go. And sometimes when it comes to earthbound beingness, you can encounter situations where a soul or a spirit will not go. And sometimes, yes, it might have to do with an unsettling or traumatic nature that relates to their passing. Though, to be perfectly honest, in most cases, that's not how it always goes. That's actually a little bit more of a rarity. Typically, when there is something tragic or violent or really messed up in that way, there actually is a huge team of higher beings that are basically there waiting on the other side to kind of help rehabilitate and patch them up right away. Right, they're kind of being received very, very lovingly on the other side very quickly. There are some beings out there that still reject that and kind of run the other way, and again, their free will is honored. There are beings that have become earthbound because maybe they are obsessed with a particular person, obsessed with a particular circumstance, obsessed with a particular story. You can find that in a lot of cases, but it's typically with earthbound beingness, it's a little bit more of a rarity these days, to be perfectly honest. I haven't necessarily run into as many earthbound spirits as, say, I would have 10 years ago, 15 years ago. And I think that has to do with this global shift in consciousness. It's just so much easier, I guess you could say, to process post-death, post-mortem, on the spiritual side of things. And so it's, being earthbound doesn't make any sense when Earth is already going through a bit of a shift. And, we're all actually going over to that 560 platform anyway. And that's where they tend to wake up after they die. So it doesnthat matter to them so much. So earthbound spirits, not exactly as common right now. It's happened, but it's more that says more about maybe a lack of inclination of a certain being to kind of follow their course. Earthbound energy, some people call it like somebody got stuck, they got lost on their way, they missed their window into the light. That is not necessarily untrue, but it's a little bit incomplete. When we talk about missing a window, you don't really miss a window to go into the light. It's not like the portal just closes, and all of these light beings just kind of like, whatever, and walk away. But what can happen is that the lower self, right? So the lower hungers, the lower drives, the lower emotions, the lower templates start to kind of wig out. They start to take over and take control. And you end up having a being that tends to start looping. They tend to start looping, and they don't really remember to leave. They don't remember that it's time to go. And when we talk about looping behavior, a good example of that is, or maybe not even just looping behavior, if anyone's ever been, in a space where just out of nowhere, whether it was because they were tired or they had anxiety or they were maybe just overwhelmed or distracted, or maybe got tunnel vision focusing on something, started just doing a lot of automatic behaviors, started just kind of doing random things that they always do, almost out of like habit and muscle memory. The lower level templates do that as well. The lower, when I say lower templates, I'm talking about like the 3D template, the 4D template of the etheric body. And so a lot of people can become kind of earthbound, so to speak, not literally bound, but just kind of bound up in the lower density, lower energy experiences because of that. And that can sometimes lead to certain beings attaching to other people or to houses or to families. Sometimes they attach out of a desire to live through those people. The lower levels, right, kind of feel that resonance. They're like, oh my goodness, I can almost play house again. I can almost do this again. Sometimes it's out of a desire to, actually live through a person. I actually recall a few situations where there was a girl who was actually who had an attachment, and this is a very strange one, where there was a being attached to her that was, she was earthbound. And this being was ultimately kind of commiserating with her, the birds of a feather, attachment kind of deal. It's like they're looking for a sense of belonging, but they've become so identified with their toxicity, their dysfunction. They've become possessive of their choices and identify with their choices. And so the idea of changing almost feels insulting to them. But if we can change and they can see that change isn't going to hurt them, they'll be okay. So it's important to, of course, just remember that, in a lot of cases, it's actually a sympathy and an identification that keeps the earthbound lower levels kind of attached to people and things. And so the second we actually raise our vibration, the second we actually start changing our ways, changing our patterns, it can help kind of motivate them to get out. After crossing over, depending on what happens on the oversoul level and on the multidimensional self level, you may still get visitations. You may still get what you might call a haunting. I don't like to use hauntings in the case of a being that is already crossed over, because haunting to me, and this is my own, this is what it implies to me, this is my own personal thing, implies something that is stuck on a loop, something that is kind of, in that lower that lower template, in running that lower program. It's like whether it's really active like an attachment, or really, really active like just this, like what we call a typical haunting, or it's a being caught in a loop. When we think about a looping behavior, think about those movies where it's like, oh, okay, the lady always goes to the balcony, at 1 a.m. to look for her husband who never came back from being at sea, something like that. That's a looping behavior. If that, to me, is where I kind of go when I think of hauntings. When I think of, maybe visitations, I think of visitations because when a being has gone to reconnect with the multidimensional self, they come and go, right? They come and go as they please, or come and go with invitation, come and go as being called. Plus, they're also working on a higher vibration at that point in time. They've kind of left the 3 and 4D templates behind, and they can still be grandma. Sometimes they show up and you have to remember who they are. They might show up as somebody they used to be in a past life, and you have to practice discernment. We'll talk about that in the holding space area. I'll give you an example. I talked about this when I gave my update on Rambo last month. He showed up to me not as a cat. He was purring and in the house and definitely spiritually active with me for that first week. But eventually he stopped showing up as a cat, and he showed up as this really big, big guy. Talking, definitely, again, Rambo named appropriate. His arms were as big as pumpkins, and he was just this huge guy. And he looked about, I want to say probably 30. And he was, that's just another aspect of his multidimensional self. And we've talked, it's, you've got to make sure that you understand that not all beings are going to, they'll show up as they choose. If grandma wants to visit her 8-year-old grandson, and he only ever knew her as a 70-plus-year-old woman, then she's going to go and and show up in the way that he's going to recognize. But she might show up as a 45-year-old woman to maybe her daughter, however she feels is right, whatever is going to vibe right for that. But that is an aspect of the multidimensional self and not being stuck. Sometimes people will continue to work with their family monad, or they will continue to work in their oversoul group or their partner oversoul group. Some oversoul groups have partner groups. And what they will do is they will serve maybe people that they have been in contact with in their previous life or in the most recent life. And they will, work within that group or within the partner group. So it really all depends on what that multidimensional self, their multidimensional self, which is connected to your multidimensional self. All of our multidimensional selves are connected at some point, in the lattice here. What that oversoul even is trying to actually achieve or trying to accomplish. Thank you so much for watching, everybody. Don't forget that there is more to come on this talk. I'm going to be releasing this in installments. If you like what you saw, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. You know I appreciate it. And if you ever wish to get a session with me, you can just go on ahead to my website, integrativemysticism.com, or follow the links below. And if you are interested in signing up and being a part of the live Patreon chats and Q&As and having access to extra horoscopes, you can always, of course, follow the links below as well. We even do special discounts and reusable coupon codes for participants of certain pledge levels. So there's something in it for everybody. Check it out. You can follow the links below for more details. Thanks a lot for stopping by. I'll see you soon.